Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
All right.
It's all
Well,
good.
It'll
It's
be
all
us.
good.
Still,
It's all
some people
good.
can do
Yeah,
it.
no, this is great. This is like
We're
BBG
recording.
reunion.
Yes.
It'll get used.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Well, Claire, we want to respect your time. So let's do our official kickoff words. I'm so delighted to have with us Claire Lim, dolltr, for the final session of our local perspectives on electronic music. And we counted you as local because you've spent so much time in the New York, Philadelphia area. I think you're New York based now.
Yes, that's correct. I am based in New York.
Fabulous. And if you are on the internet, if you are on YouTube, you will see Claire everywhere.
Yes.
She's working with 343 Labs. She's one of the main instructors there. She's an instructor at Berklee, the New York campus.
Actually, I was just telling Jen about this, Kendall, but I'm supposed to technically be on the Boston campus. But there is the New York stuff. So there is some stuff that may come in the future. So we'll see what happens.
So of course, so Claire will be on both campuses is how this is going to go. She will be flying back and forth. And she is one of the few women. So Ableton is a product we use in our 137 class as a digital audio workstation. Very, very renowned, very, very sophisticated tool. To date, there had been maybe two women in the world who are Ableton certified instructor. Yeah. And recently Claire came through with a class of 4 women who blew it away. And are now additional Ableton certified instructors, which means that you have a lot of power in the community, right? You have a lot of respect in terms of going out and teaching independently, kind of developing new approaches, having the ear of Ableton and letting them work with you. And so Claire, maybe quickly you can just tell us like what role does Ableton play in your workflow? Because some of our students are familiar with Ableton.
Sure, totally. Thanks, Kendall. Thanks for that very kind introduction. That was like, I didn't know what to do.
Blown away to have you here. We're so fanboys.
Yeah, we're fanning out here. Yeah.
It always gets so awkward with these things, but yeah, I mean, as far as like the software goes, I mean, you might be able to see this also. I got the hardware too. I'm I'm a fan of it. I tell people this story a lot as far as like workflow goes, or even just like my electronic music background in general. But I got into electronic music as a whole because of live performance. So actually before I think, before I entered college, I was very much like a purist. It's a very weird sort of thing to be, but I was classically trained in piano and flute. So when people brought up things like, oh, electronic music, then I would be like, oh, that's just like a kick drum, which it kind of is, but it's more than that, right? It's more than that. So sorry, Jen.
So that's a great journey. So let's dive into that a bit, because we have those camps. We see those camps in our community all the time, right? Like, oh, you're just, you just turn knobs. Oh, that's, too electronic is too repetitive. Oh, it's not really
real music.
Right. This is real music. Like if you're not using, music theory 5, doesn't count.
The time it takes, like, we mention this all the time, but like I spent 15 years learning piano and you spent 3 weeks learning how to turn a knob, and it's almost threatening in this way, even though it doesn't have to be. It's two different things. So
but you made that transition.
Yeah, I did. And I guess I'm still kind of like maybe still making that, because I still love doing classical piano. I still love doing classical flute, but kind of going even back to what Jen said about this idea of being threatening, to be honest, I think that is really the key. And maybe that even speaks beyond music, but we often just fear what we don't understand. And that was really a lot of what it was for me. Like I didn't really at the time even bother listening very carefully to electronic music at all. So of course I assumed that it was just going to be some random repetitive thing, right? I mean, that's the assumption that a lot of people would have. It's the assumption that my parents still have. Sorry, mom and dad, if you're watching. Your kid's now doing this for a living. But yeah, it's kind of that. And yeah, I think, but it's funny because this also goes back maybe even to just the whole idea of fearing stuff. Because truth be told, even when I started wanting to do music in general, my family was not totally supportive anyway. But now that they've been exposed to more of my work, they see me doing these things, they understand a lot better. And they're like, hey, this seems, you seem like you're alive, so that should be fine. So there's a lot of that. But to kind of go back to the time taken and the perceptions, I do think that very frankly, the media has a lot to do with it too. We only see the celebrity of a lot of these things. We don't really see all of the work that goes into something. And I had this conversation with another of my live performer friends. So like I said, I do live electronic performance as my focus. And for every second that you spend on stage, there's probably been years behind making that 1 second work. And people just don't realize because you make it look so easy, which is our job, right? So it's our job to make things look easy and make it look as if it takes no effort. But to get to that point, it's taken so many years and so much hard work. And I think that's really the part that both makes me very happy about electronic music and also is really challenging as well, because you do need to put in so much time to master something. And I think when it comes to music tech, it's really not just the tech, but it is the musicality, right? Because you don't want to end up like that person who's just knowing how to work something as a tool, but not actually knowing how to properly use the tool to create something musical. Which I think the power of a lot of electronic musicians, really, like all of us here, like we know the tech, we know like the coding, we know the programming behind stuff, but we also know how to use that creatively. And I think that's really the part that I try to focus on a lot, even with my students when I work with them, or even the clients that I work with, like the other artists who I help design like live shows and stuff. It's like, how do we make it seem like you're doing cool stuff, but it's not just like for the sake of doing it. It's really for your higher like artistic vision and your higher artistic purpose.
And let me ask you, because in terms of like live performance, right? So electronic artists almost have a tough call to make, because you could do so much preparation, but there's very little visual performance, right? On the other extreme, you could like code raves, like you could have the code displayed on the screen as you're performing.
I love algo raves.
Right?
So good.
Like algo raves, right? So that's like a whole nother edge of the distribution. And so what do you see happening in those two extremes? Like, do you see one kind of picking up popularity, or?
Totally. I think both of them kind of have their own communities, Kendall. I feel like at this stage, like for example, I guess a really concrete sort of example I can give is that at Berklee at the moment, they're starting a creative coding minor. So people can do like algorithmic raving with the knowledge that they learn in class, which is awesome.
That's
so I think there
cool.
there is that field kind of taking off. And then of course there's the more performative side of things. I think it really does depend on context in a way. It's like, in what context is this happening? Like if you're doing electronic music performance in like a very quote unquote commercial sort of setting that's meant to be very visual and meant to be very like lighting heavy, this whole experience, and that's one thing. So that's actually a little bit of like Berklee's live experience design program, the master's program. It's like, how do we create something that's very cohesive and that people really are experiencing? But if you go into say like an algo rave with the knowledge or with some kind of expectation of what you're having, then there's also a specific context for that. And I feel like everyone kind of, just goes about poking around their head in these things, and it's like, hey, let's check this out, see what's happening. And then if you end up falling in love with it, then that's like really awesome.
So we have a lot of students who are, I mean, not all of us, some of us we fill the whole spectrum of ages, but we have many younger students, right? So if you remember back to being 17, I think you don't know who you are yet. You don't really have that bedrock of confidence, so it can be very intimidating to have to ask as many questions as I had to ask to figure out what was going on here. Do you have any like secrets, or like, how did it feel for you? Because again, like women are a minority in this field by a long shot. And so as an engineer, I know that the trick was always like, if you were the one woman engineer, you'd better know everything, because you were representing all women engineers of all time, and they were all going to think that this is what
one thing you don't know. It's so bad.
My God, like, I was just about to say that. I think like when I was younger and really first entering, like I thought I needed to know everything, but that's like, it's in a way a little bit of my character too. Like I've always enjoyed knowing stuff. So, so even growing up, like way before like electronic music stuff, I just like a lot of knowledge. I'd be like, hey, that's really cool. It's a lot, very curious about stuff. But yeah, I think like when I was first really stepping out of college even, and maybe going into the professional world, like I really made sure to know stuff. And to practice and like be very conscientious about things that I was doing. So it's like, hey, if I need to brush up on this piece of knowledge, I'll tackle that and I'll make sure that I know it. And it's interesting because I was thinking about this a lot over like the last couple of months, especially with a lot of the educational stuff that I was doing in a more like college related context that kind of prepares people directly for the workforce. And and I came across this quote by Erin, who we know, Erin Vera. Hi, Erin. I didn't know you were watching. But Erin made, I think she had a quote that got shared by one of the other organizations, and she said like one of the most powerful things as a woman in music tech for her was the ability to say like, I don't know, and that's
So
okay,
that,
and to be okay
yeah.
with that. Yeah. And I
Wow,
thought I
yes.
just thought about it and dwelled about that on that so much, because like you said, there are so many weird scenarios that can happen, right? It's like if you don't know something, then people are like, oh, she's the woman who doesn't know stuff, or you know, whatever they might say, or they might think like you're representing all the women, like Jen said. It's like 'cause
Yeah.
you're the one woman, right?
Yeah.
And my hope is that things change. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it'll be slow. I think it's definitely like still a process. It's something that still
Yeah.
happens in even in some of the classes that I teach right now, like in Berklee as well. You can kind of see sometimes you'll get reactions from a few of like the men students versus like the women students, and it's like
Yes.
there's an interesting dynamic that we still have to manage as
Yeah.
professors and instructors. Yeah.
So in computer science, I know a good friend of mine gave me a great lesson. He said, like no one is allowed, I'm not allowed to hear in my class, oh, I can't believe you didn't know, blah, blah, blah. Right? It's that
Right.
passive aggressive, like, oh, I'll help you. I'll help you by first making sure you know that you're lesser than me. And you know what, the trick he told me is, you know what, there are plenty of people who know this stuff. Just if somebody answers your question like that, just don't go back to them again. Like there are other people who are going to know and be able to work with you, and they're not going to have that attitude. And finding the right mentors and finding the right people. Has that, like, did you just end up going to YouTube all the time, or you just sat there with a stack of manuals and PDF files, or did you have people that you could count on?
Totally. It was kind of both. I think like I've been in a position in my life in general where I don't necessarily have like a specific person off the top of my head that I can consider a mentor, but I've been very fortunate to have had, I think, several moments in my life where like I experienced mentorship. So for example, even just like working with Erin, like, and having her like share her ideas and see her as a role model, that for me was mentorship. It wasn't necessarily like emailing her and being like, can you mentor me or something like that, which I feel like some people also think about, and that's really cool if you have a personal mentor. But for me, I think it's more about the little moments. So even Loudon, for example, he's mentored me in lots of really wonderful ways, even though I never was like directly his student in some sense. He's always been like, hey, like, approach this in this way, or like do this in this way. And really the way that we worked more extensively together, and for context, because I know this is recorded, so Loudon Stearns is the he's a professor at Berklee College of Music too, and he's currently the interim director at one of the Berklee New York City programs. But the first time I worked with Loudon was back when I was a student just about to graduate, and we did the commencement concert, the Berklee commencement concert, and I was the very first player doing live electronics in the concert, and no one knew what to do with me. So
it's amazing.
They're like,
her in the back.
Yeah, no, totally. And it was a bit strange, and thankfully though, because no one knew what to do with me, I had a little bit more agency to do what I wanted. And then Loudon was always like, you have the vision, let's support you and get that vision going. That for me was like, okay, this is what it means to have
that's
like, support.
You
know?
just said it. You just said it. Like being supportive and letting the creativity just flourish.
Totally. That's been something that I've been really grateful for. So I think it's like the little moments. But it's funny that you mentioned the manual thing, Kendall, because like I the way that I learned Ableton Live was honestly to just read the manual. I joke about this. I know, right?
It's a great manual. It's one of the few great manuals.
So good. I was talking to some of my students about this, and I was like, I'm dead serious. You should just read the manual. and I got like really passionate about it. So at some point last year during the pandemic, I did this like mini podcast series called RTFM, Read the Friendly Manual, where I would just read chapters of the Ableton Live manual like an audiobook.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh.
I had people come up to, I was there with Ben Casey once, who's a brand manager at Ableton, and somebody said, oh, what's the secret to becoming certified for Ableton? And he goes, study the manual. We told you what to know. It's the manual. We wrote
Yeah, totally. It's funny because like when I did get certified, and this is an interesting experience in itself too. When I did get certified, I had a lot of people asking me like, "Oh, how did you do it?" in an almost like very incredulous sort of sense, which can be interpreted in many different ways. But back to like the yeah, how did you do it? And I was like, I read the manual and I read instructions and I applied. That's it.
Yeah, it's not some like mysterious, like had to travel up a million staircases and then jump through some hoops of fire. Like
from now on, I'm gonna say that, Jen. I'm gonna be like, yes, I did all of that. And here I am.
Trick. It's not reading.
So I'll tell you though, I think it takes a special kind of bravery to put yourself in the situations you're describing that led to your growth, right? You put yourself out there like you were the first electronic performer at Berklee. And, you know, you were one of the few women to ever even try to be certified and able to, I mean, you're putting yourself out there for things that may go well or may not go well. And what do you call on? Like what kind of, how do you become so brave? What if you don't feel that brave?
Yeah, totally, Kendall. To be honest, like I'm not sure if it's braveness or maybe it's just foolhardiness. just like do it. No, I think like it's always been for me when I've like really wanted something, like I can feel it. It's a very strange thing to describe, but it's almost like a really arbitrary sort of gut feeling in a way. It's like this is meant to happen and I'm gonna make it happen. So a lot of that like manifestation of that, but I think it also maybe stems a bit to just my personal thing of like knowing things and like being very sure of certain things that I want to know and that I hope to know. I think
it's one of the things. Yeah, I agree with you. It's one of the things I love about electronics and mathematics, quite frankly, is that there's an answer. And like once you have the answer, it will always be true for all time. I mean, you know, MIDI has 16 channels and like nobody can argue with you. Like they can say whatever they want. They like you can't just prove to them that that's it and the discussion's over. And that, especially in the times we live in now, that kind of certainty is very attractive.
Yeah, totally. And I think like in a way, maybe that's the part of me that just is drawn to music tech so much, because I feel like there are moments where I feel so strongly like happy that things are fixed, and then there are other moments where I just feel like I'm so joyful amongst like total chaos, like artistically speaking. So I feel like music tech is that perfect middle ground that kind of marries both of those things for me. And it's weird because I feel like back when I was like before college and like high school and middle school, I should have seen this as a sign, but like I was really bad at a lot of sciencey things. The only thing I would pass was in physics, the chapter on sound waves. That was it. I should have guessed. I should have guessed. And years later, here we are. So yeah.
Well, you know, and I think that's true. It's like, I think it's something that as an engineer, you don't really experience it. Not that engineering doesn't have creativity, but I've always been amazed at musicians and people willing to lead that kind of artistic, creative life, because I mean, and you know, the internet is a big enough place that you can go on the internet and you can find people who say, "Let It Be" sucks. "Let It Be" is the stupidest song. It's like not sophisticated. It doesn't have. And you're like, let it be. Like if you wrote "Let It Be," you're done, aren't you? Like, isn't that no, they're haters. Don't worry. I mean, you know, you can find people who dislike Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and they're down thumbing it. I mean, you know, like what are you to do? So I think in that environment, you just have to recognize it's okay to be yourself.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's also like this is something that maybe I did learn from like my early life. So I actually don't usually tell people about this, but hey, so back in the day, like even before I did a lot of like electronic music stuff, I had a YouTube channel like as a teenager, and I would do like those, you know, those like acapella covers where people record themselves like 10 times and then I used to do that.
You and Jacob Collier.
I used to be Jacob Collier for K-pop. It was all K-pop. It was all K-pop acapella covers. And I used to do that. And from that like first life that I had, I it's so weird. I had never talked about this like in public before. But it's like, so this is a Montco exclusive. No. but yeah, it was so weird because I think that experience that I had in like, and this was like earlier YouTube days. So this is quite a few years ago, but that in a way kind of exposed me to a lot of like strange internet comments that people would give. And then years later, I can kind of look back on that and see like, hey, that was actually really good, quote unquote, training in a way, because it was just a confirmation about how the world is so big. Like you said, there's so many people with different opinions, and you don't have to please everyone. You can't. So don't. You don't have to.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a message that I think is a great, almost a survival skill right now. I mean, what breaks my heart is I see so many students come into my office and they'll like, they'll like be playing a little thing on a, some kind of little sequencer, or they'll have a little doodle pad and I'm like, oh, like, you like art or you like music. They're like, oh, I used to, but I saw how good everybody is on the internet and I don't do it anymore.
Yeah. I get that a lot too.
Yeah. And your heart just, that's just the opposite of what all of us in tech hoped for.
Yeah, totally.
So I don't want to like just drag you to every childhood memory, though we will. If you
I don't mind. Yeah, it's all good.
But is there anything like that you're performing on, you're working with now that you'd like to share with us? Or are there any, you do such a great series on Push.
Thank
and
you.
Yes, the tips and tricks on Push, which is Ableton's hardware.
Live feeds, like they're so fun.
Oh God.
Yeah, those have been great. You've done amazing. 343. How did it come about that you worked with 343? How do you feel about that lab
setting? It's been wonderful. It kind of happened a little bit serendipitously because I got in touch with Max, who's the co-founder of 343 Labs, and he's an Ableton certified trainer as well. And this was actually just after I got certified, so we were in touch. And 343 Labs is an electronic music school based in New York. But now we have a site that's in Berlin. So Max is actually matching that too. So we have New York, Berlin, and then we do the online school. But yeah, Max just got in touch with me. And at that time, 343 had just become an Ableton certified training center. So specifically with CTs, and he was looking for a little bit more, help around the school or people to provide instruction. So he pulled me on board, and I've been very, very grateful for that. It's been such a wonderful community. I will say that it's again been interesting because, and Max knows this too, but with a lot of these online electronic music schools, it tends to be a very bro-y sort of situation. Right. So then being the only like woman instructor was a little strange. Like there were times where I was doing, for example, the YouTube streams that you were mentioning, Kendall, with like the tips and tricks stuff. And then people would just ask like totally inappropriate questions. So I would just answer them on the stream. So now they can see it. And I will call out their names so they can be fully immortalized. And yeah, I mean, like I previously used to just brush these things away because I didn't know how to deal with them. But it's like, let's just call these people out. But anyway, back to 343. It's been wonderful. They've had a really great community. They often work a lot with folks who are really just starting out. And I think that's something that I'm very passionate about too, because it's like, how do we actually even just get people in? Like, because there's always such a barrier sometimes with like, you're looking at things from the outside, almost like a voyeuristic sort of thing. But like, how do you get yourself into the community? And it's oftentimes through a very hands-on sort of thing, or through people within the community, bringing people in. So that's a part that I love also about 343 Labs. They run the Ableton user group for New York City. So that's a really great opportunity also to just introduce people to the different things that you can do with Live or with Push and with all these things. So yeah, we've been working on a lot of content related to Live 11, especially Jen and I were just talking about Live 11 before. So I might even be able to show a couple of things with Live 11.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So I would love to do that. But yeah, it's been good working on a lot of stuff. I'm currently trying to develop more material as well for the Berklee Electronic Digital Instrument Program specifically.
Good.
So to put things into context, about 3 years ago at this point, Berklee in Boston announced this launch of a new program where essentially students would be able to enter the college with electronics as their main instrument. And that's honestly been going on for like years in Europe, but this was the first program at an undergraduate level in the States to do it. So it was a pretty big deal for folks, and the usual backlash, like laptop musicians, not real musicians, blah blah blah, la-di-da. But anyway,
I hear it all the time. So
I know, right? And but yeah, so it happened anyway though, and I was one of the students at the time who this was before I graduated, who were kind of like guinea pigs in a way of like, okay, let's see if we can use these folks to help to, you know, demonstrate a little bit of what we're looking for. So a lot of the content that you'll see on Berklee's YouTube channel that pertains to EDI stuff was from my slightly younger days. But yeah, so they did that, and now it's kind of come full circle. So I teach in the program right now, and I help a lot of these like entering students learn and really get up and running with like their instruments. Help them.
And do you find they fall into a certain genre? Are they always hip hop folks, or are they always ambient music folks, or they just want to do house and nothing else? Or
totally, it's actually been really pleasantly surprising, Kendall, because like there are some students, like one of my really good students, they're kind of into like alt electronic rock types of things.
It's so cool.
So like M83, like a ton of things. I have one of my other students is like huge Aphex Twin Flying Lotus fan, so they're doing like hybrid hip hop things, like brain feeder style stuff. And I'm like, yeah, you do you. And then another of my students, she's very poppy, so she does a lot of like the more commercial pop stuff, and you know, and enjoys it too. And I think one of like the most liberating things about the program, which works for some people but also doesn't work for a lot of people, that it's really meant to be performance based. So it's not so much the production stuff itself. So we're really saying like, don't sit down in front of your laptop, but you can stand up in front of your laptop and, you know, use a controller to perform something in that way. And I think it's good for a lot of folks who are more used to that idea of like in the box stuff, because, you know, we're always so closed in, and we have this computer screen that you're looking at. So for a number of people, they're using it in a way as their liberation. And that was actually what this was for me when I first started too, because coming from like a piano and flute sort of thing, it's like there's pretty much only one way that you can, or not one way, but there's a pretty set like pedagogical approach to
a very specific
to learning these things. But with Push, it's like, okay, you have chromatic mode, you can do like drum pads on it, you can not even do anything, you can just do like session mode, and you can launch a bunch of clips, and that's fine also. So you can do like all of these different things, and being able to do that, I think for a lot of people is like just so powerful, because it's literally your instrument is anything you want it to be. It's anything at all. If you know how to use it, it's like that's it. So yeah, so that's
no, it's I love your take on it. I completely agree.
It's fun. But yeah, so I think that kind of maybe speaks a little bit to like my overall approach to a lot of the electronic stuff. Like I'm still very much a fan of the live side of things, which is why the pandemic has been so sad. But it's like all the live stuff. Yeah, but it's like an adaptability, right? So it's like now we've got all of these virtual stuff that's going on. So maybe I might even be able to show a little bit of that and be
terrific.
Like, yeah, whatever you want to show us, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure, totally. So one thing that I do a lot of is I do kind of have two approaches to things. So sometimes when I'm making music, especially under my artist project dolltr, which I kind of keep like very separate from my my professional stuff, but when I'm doing dolltr and when she's like, you know, making music or she's performing or whatever, she's kind of like in a very free state of mind where she's not like doing things. And sometimes it's weird, I refer to her in third person anyway, but it's like, so she's kind of making music from two angles. Like sometimes I start with music from almost like a performance perspective, and then I produce a song based off a performance. Or sometimes I do write a song first and I produce it, and then I do it in reverse. So I have these like two weird approaches to not weird, but like two different approaches from different angles. But maybe I can show like one of them, which is the side of, okay, here's a production, and then how do you actually make that into a performance? So let me do a little bit of my cooking show. I call this my cooking show because I have like prepared Ableton live sets. So let me grab my first chicken or my first like set of stuff. But yeah, I love producing in live. I produce in a couple of different softwares actually. So sorry, Ableton, or not sorry. They're very nice about it. But I sometimes produce in Logic, or I sometimes do it in Bitwig, or sometimes I do Ableton stuff.
Well, Bitwig used to be very, I mean, and I have a lot more time I should spend with Bitwig, but it was the only MPE kind, right? It was the big MPE player out there until Ableton 11. So
yeah, totally. And I was like I am a bit of a triple agent in a weird way, because I'm certified in Bitwig and Ableton Live and Logic too. So sorry to everyone who I'm offending.
Nice.
But anyway, it's like
triple threat.
Yeah, no, it's like it's literal threat, Kendall. But yeah, I think like I showed this or I wanted to show this is kind of like an example of when I'm using live. Like this is one of the processes that I had for it. So I build out a live set. How many tracks does this have? This is from one of my tunes called Crumble that I released last year, and I kind of parsed out the section 125. Not too bad. But there's like a lot of there's sorry.
We should give that as a homework, Jen.
Yes. 125. Yeah.
Here are the first 5. You complete.
Yeah, to be honest, like there are some like just big stacks though. Like I mentioned, I do sing a little bit when I record stuff, so there's lots of vocals here. The vocals themselves are like 30 something, but there's like just lots of vocal layers. And this was a tune that it was one that I wrote first and then I produced, and then I was like, okay, now that I have the song, how do I transfer into a live sort of setting? So maybe we can just take a listen to like a quick snippet of it and see how it goes. And then afterwards, I love to show like the actual final live performance and how that kind of
terrific
inspired. So like a step-by-step sort of thing. So yeah, here's a tune called Crumble from a while ago. Yes.
Trying, moving on, fighting, play along, yeah. Wired on the edge, slighted in the end, yeah. Will you be watching when I'm long forgotten? Will you be laughing when I can't be strong? Oh, still you'll be running when I've tripped and given it my all. Oh, so who's the animal? The words that you spit in my eye, you know I can never reply. The burn of the dust and the lie, you know I can never deny. The way that I'm feeling inside, if I should just crumble and hide, wait for the day you want to save my life, wanna save my life.
But yeah, that's just like a snippet of the tune just for a little bit of context. But
the vocal layering was really, really cool.
Thanks.
Something I talk about in my classes a lot. We have this perception of music being like drum, vocal, bass, and it's like, no, actually putting like 50,000 layers of vocals makes it sound so much cooler. And it's really cool when students like see this like whole eye-opening experience of like visualizing sound, sort of in the sense of seeing it in a doll. But like, I don't know. It's really cool. I don't know.
Yeah, no, totally. Thank you for noticing that, Jen. Like I love the vocal processing stuff too. But yeah,
it's so
we can
cool.
even like listen to, I think there's a fun,
there's a lot going on
vocally part. Whoops. At the end, this one's pretty okay. But yeah, so I still incorporate like flute, for example, in a lot of my tunes. Like I still do that too. But let's see if we can find the vocal stuff here, maybe.
Walls are falling, crumble, crumble, walls are falling, crumble, crumble, streets are calling, crumble, crumble, streets are calling, crumble, crumble, walls are falling.
And it's just like a bunch of like layers. Just record yourself like 10 times and be your own choir and put yourself down and do all these things. But yeah, I love doing these kinds of things. And this one is really more of like one of the more linear things that I've actually done, I think, or that started in a very sort of linear sense, like let's write the song first and then let's produce it and then let's figure out what to do. And that doesn't traditional and that doesn't happen like all the time. Like sometimes I work in the opposite direction, which I'll show a little bit of later. But yeah, so when I'm making music in this way, I still try to kind of like tie it back to live performance. So now that I have the entire live set and my CPU is a little bit less than desirable, it's like, how do we actually get this to a safe place? I use the word like safe CPU a lot with my students and be like, what safe CPU is like 0%, which is not happening right now. But here's also a really neat, like I'll throw in a couple of like Live 11 features maybe, but CPU monitoring, average and current. I love that so much.
Oh, that's awesome.
Just like, the cool part also is I think, so if you're in session view, you can also see like individual tracks that might be a bit more CPU heavy. I froze this one, so it should be fine. But if you're playing everything back, then if something is very CPU heavy, it'll like bounce up and you can be like, that's the culprit. And then you can freeze that track. So very fun stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is like an example of a type of song that maybe I would produce. So how do I then go about creating other stuff in like live performances? So then what I tend to do is, oh, don't say this. What I tend to do is I kind of use this side of my professional thing that did a lot of like playback engineering with like stems and like live shows. And I kind of like almost imagine professionally when I'm doing my live shows that I'm like an independent live experience designer working for dolltr. So it's a little bit of like
Oh,
a
cool.
I
Yeah,
I
yeah.
separate
really
sort of
like
thing.
the separation. Like I think that's really
Yeah.
cool because it allows like dolltr, for instance, to just explore and just do it and not have this like
Totally.
and not having it anchored to you. I'm not saying this is negative, but not having it anchored to you allows you to just kind of be more open-minded to your own possibilities.
Yeah, totally. To be
Yeah.
honest, that's the premise I think of a lot of why I still keep dolltr like really separate. And I think in a way it's also let me be a bit more, I guess, astute about the work that I do, just because like when people are hiring Claire, they're really hiring Claire and they're not like hiring dolltr to do like a mix job for them or something, because she'll probably ruin it or whatever. But like but yeah, so I kind of keep things a little separate, and in a way it is a little bit of an alter ego thing, because I
Yeah.
do still
Nice.
occasionally get like, stage fright and stuff. It's so normal. I just like, I get butterflies in my stomach before I perform or something, and just being in dolltr mode kind of puts, it's a mode, right? So it puts me into like
It is,
that mindset, and it's like, okay, you're just here to have fun. Don't worry about like the techie side of thing. You know what that knob does. You move that knob. You do you. And afterwards, Claire can clean up the mess. So there's a lot of that. But yeah, so I kind of adopt that sort of approach, and then I basically create different kinds of stems. So this is something that happens a lot in the field of playback engineering. But if you ever see like a live show that people will perform, say from start to finish, so maybe you've got like a very clearly designed set of like, okay, we're going to go from this song to this song to this song to this song. We tend to work a lot with stems, so we'll have groups of different types of instruments like drums, FX, bass, guitar, any chords or harmony stuff, vocals as well. And it takes a kind of, it's almost a little bit like front of house, really. It's like you're sending all of these different things to different tracks and being able to manage them in different ways with different leveling. And because of that, it also helps a little bit with CPU. So obviously now we have all of these parts, and we still have a lot of CPU. But when I'm thinking about how to transform a song that's been produced into like a performance, I think a lot about what exactly I'm going to do live. And in that way, I think I still rely very heavily on my musicianship, I think, to carry me through, because it's like musician first and then the technology. If there's no good music, then the technology is not going to save you. So you got to have the good music first, and you got to be doing stuff, right? So a lot of the time when I do this like reverse process of doing a production first and then transforming it into a performance, I kind of think about like, what would be really exciting if I were in an audience to see a musician do, or to see a live performer do.
I've noticed that translate with like electronic live performance, even just pulling your hand off the the note a certain way, or just making it more visually interactive rather than just going like I'm typing on a computer. Like
yeah, totally.
Like very subtle things. It kind of translates from that world into
it does totally, Jen. And I think like as far as the one of my colleagues who I teach alongside, the amazing Daedalus, like he talks a lot about like gestures and movement, and I think there's something that's really powerful about doing something and then having somebody in the audience, or someone who maybe doesn't even know like anything about music, understand what that equates to. So it's like, if I'm moving a knob, can I hear something audible happen? Or if I'm pressing this note on push, can I hear the result of that very clearly? Or like, what's that relationship between what I'm doing and what I'm not doing? And I think, to be honest, like a lot of that maybe confusion, or that the stereotype about the button pushing, that comes from people not really knowing what we're doing. I think that's why they're saying, oh, they're just pushing buttons, because they don't understand that each button has a result that's happening, and sometimes it's not completely audible in a very like obvious sort of way. For example, I spoke to one of my students about this, but we were discussing about like, okay, let's say you're doing some kind of MIDI mapping thing, all right, or like you're planning how to use a controller. How do you decide whether to use like a button or whether you're supposed to use a knob. Because for example, if you're doing MIDI mapping, you could very easily use some kind of keyboard to turn something on and off with like a key that you're pressing, like a MIDI note, because it's just on and off, right? But if someone in the audience is seeing you pressing a keyboard and doesn't know that you're turning something on and off, then they immediately think that you're trying to fake something, and like there's no sound coming out of your keyboard or something, right? So it's like it's
That's
a lot of like
this, like the visuals have to correspond.
Yeah, it's like how to translate something, and honestly, that's one of like I think the best signs of a really well designed performance. It's like you understand, even if you don't understand the tech 100%, you understand the performance of it. So it's like you don't have to know like how live runs super deeply at its core, but if you understand the performance and if it's cohesive, then that's a success. And of course, you know, degrees of success can depend on the artist, but so far I found like reasonable success of that. So it's been helpful for me so far. So yeah, I still rely very heavily on the musicianship. I'm like, okay, maybe there's a part where I'll play the electric piano, or there's a part where I'll play like the claps as like a manual trigger or something like that. So that's a lot of like the design element, and eventually all of this in arrangement view. So just to put everyone on the same page, Ableton Live has 2 views, and arrangement view is really good for doing things on a linear timeline because you get the number of measures or bars, and then you also get the overall timestamps whenever you're dealing with a piece of music. But oftentimes I love performing in session view, and that tends to be my main mode of performance really for stuff that's going on. So let's not save this, but let's see what this looks like transferred over into the other view of live, which is session view. Yeah,
I guess I've encountered like you know, I have students who come from different like even Pro Tools or Logic and they see this and they're like, what?
Yeah, it's
so
crazy.
So like how do you describe it to like someone that is familiar with a DAW? And how, like, I'm trying to
Those are the people we have the most struggle with in 137, right? Like people who haven't seen anything, we show them session view and they pick up the idea and they're composing and they're, you know, building as long as they move down in a track in clips. And people who have seen something, I can't even understand it. They hear what we're saying. They understand this is what we're doing, and they just refuse to look at it, and they go over into arrangement view.
Yeah, totally. I think so. Something that I've noticed a lot with people who do have that mentality, Kendall, is I think we're and maybe this is even like very natural for us, but like we're always drawn to familiarity. I think, and it's that idea of it's which is a good idea sometimes, but it's like, if it's not broke, like don't fix it. If it's like if this works in a certain way and I know how to operate it in this view, then I'm just going to use this view. And that's why for sometimes in a lot of my classes, actually, I almost never touch arrangement view until like much later. So I quote unquote force everyone to use session view, but I kind of position it in a way as if it's like, when you're learning something, or if you're learning this instrument, which is actually what live is, right? In a way, it's an instrument on its own. If you're learning something, there's a specific reason why you should learn to use it, and it's like the reason why it was created, right? We forget about this, but the name of the software is Live. It was used for live performance. The very first iteration of live was like starting off in session view. The only thing that they used arrangement view for was to record in the performances. So that's like the premise of it, right? It's like that's what live is for. So I almost kind of say that, and I truly think this, but if you don't use a program that was meant for live performance to do it, that's just like a missed opportunity, I think, for a lot of wonderful things that can happen, because you could do like linear arrangements with pretty much any other DAW out there.
Well, that's what I always argue. I'm like, this is what I mean, besides other things like Max and stuff. I mean, this is what makes Ableton shine, is like having this like sketch pad to like make all
the sketch pad and just like this playground in a way of like, here's all the cool stuff that you can do, and you can have things go on and on and on and on, and you can experiment and do like whatever you want without being tied.
So maybe it's the lack of like, you know, rules in a sense, like having so many different things, it kind of can be a little threatening, just sort of going okay, I can do whatever I want, and there's no time restriction or there's or either way, wherever. So it's infinite. So I think maybe, I'm just thinking out loud, maybe that's a little bit what it has to do with it.
Yeah, maybe it could be. And I'd actually be curious to hear about this from y'all, but like in your experiences, because I know that you work with controllers with your students too. Have you ever encountered any resistance to the controllers?
I'm trying to think, like, because for my other classes, no apprehension, but I don't, like, a little bit like a little nervous. But I would honestly say it's not so much controllers, but like consoles, or like, outboard gear and
Yes.
stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
literally, like, I'm like, you cannot break this. I promise you cannot break this. And like but
Totally.
I have to say, it becomes like when I have students, in our studios for the first time patching or something, and they're and nothing explodes, nothing catches on fire. And I think it's a really empowering experience, because they're like, hey, I can do this, just like the big people do.
Yeah, totally.
But I don't know. And I think it's because lack of integration so far, because of not being in person. Yes, Isaiah. Sorry, what was I gonna say? Having enough experience with actual MIDI controllers. If anything, people have been excited.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. No, I was curious because like sometimes I've been in situations where like, let's say I'm teaching someone live and like how to use like, hey, here's how to use Ableton Live. And then I showed all of this stuff to them in the DAW. And then we kind of bring up the idea of like, hey, you can also use a controller. And then they're like, why would I need something hardware if I can do it in the DAW? And I feel like
that's interesting. That's like reverse. Like,
totally, yeah, which is kind of
that.
weird, right? And it's so interesting because I almost feel like maybe that even speaks also to the idea of like the arrangement view versus session view thing.
Yeah,
it's like you're not familiar with one thing, so you're just gonna default to the thing that you know because it works for you, and you don't actually want to do that. So now this is good.
Maybe it's not a digital or analog war thing. Maybe it's just like what you're exposed to first, and then that shift of change of what you're familiar with makes it uncomfortable. So you're just like, I don't know, do I want to try that? Like, so yeah.
I think in the perfect world, like we've outfitted our lab with push and IMAX at every station. We've run classes where we had like Novation, right? We had like little like Novation launch key or Novation launch pads. And when they in those environments, like you can turn on chromatic key and they just can't make a mistake. Like everything's musical,
which is cool.
And I mean, and so that I think has proven to be a fantastic pathway. If you don't know anything, you walk in. We've had, we did after school programs and kids would bring their little sisters, and the 2-year-olds would like lay down this cool beat, and like they had no qualms about it, and nobody else like takes the barrier way down here, and that's what's exciting to me, is that like the barrier drops to the floor.
I kind of see it as like reverse, like I don't know, reverse. I don't even know the word to put after it, but going like, wow, look at this. This scale is really cool. Wow, I can make these cool sounds. I'm making music. I want to know more, rather than being like, okay, you must learn music theory, you must do that. It's like it's almost like you want to learn it from that experience. So it's like it's like, which I think that's how education should be approached. It's like you want to know, and just having these tools and having this accessibility to get there, rather than going like, all right, you need to take like 5,000 prereq classes to even go into a music theory class to learn music theory. Like it just becomes, it's like a reverse of that, I guess.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think it's so interesting because sometimes I notice that it's really built into like that sense of like curiosity and like wanting to do stuff. I found it so much more in like the kids. I was just thinking about this because of like BBG, right? But it's like we give the kids a controller and the girls just like take it and then they do whatever the hell they want, and it turns out awesome. Versus there have been situations where I've shown push to like my college students maybe, and then they're like poking at one note at a time, and it's like, is this right? And I'm like, just use the thing. And it's like that sense of like tripping up, I think, or like I don't want to trip up, or like I don't want to make a mistake. So
it could come from that like academic mentality of like, if I don't do it right, I'll fail. Or
Yeah.
also it speaks largely kind of to that YouTube thing of like, well, if I do this wrong once, I'll never be able to do anything because everyone on YouTube, not seeing behind the scenes, does it amazing. So,
and so Claire, let me ask you an obvious question though. Like, so here's your session to perform live. And I mean, I think about this all the time with like preset names, right? Like Jen did some presets for Isotope, and you have to name these presets, and and you're like, well, you've got like, 3 words to describe like a distinct type of reverb from 67 other types of reverb. So like even in your live sets, like in your session names for each clip, like how do you just remember that like the 8th clip is has a calypso flavor to it, and the 3rd clip is Afrobeat?
It's kind of interesting, Kendall, and I think this is one part that I love about Push as well. But depending on how you organize things, they can be like super colorful. So I often like to do the color coding. This isn't the final set, but actually let me pull up the final version of the set. This is like the halfway done set, but eventually when I get to my final set, I think let's use number 7. Let's do that. I like to use a lot of like color coding based type of thing. So I'm a very like visual type of person on Push, and a lot of controllers. It's like if the colors match for me, it just makes me very happy.
Yeah.
So I have a certain like color coding system internally in my head. I think, for example, like my drums will always be some sort of like a reddish brown type of thing. FX in my head are like white and yellow. I'm not like synesthesia. I don't have synesthesia. And then my bass will always be blue. It's more just like a color coding system. And then like harmonies and chords are always purple. Lead synths are always pink, but vocals are always green. So that's why all the vocals here are all green. And then QNeo, which I use for a lot of my like sample triggering stuff, it's also red because it has a lot of like the drum stuff. Then eventually when I start navigating my live set, if I were to look, say, directly at Push, like this over here, it just all becomes very clear because I know immediately like, okay, these are like the stemmy parts that I need to do. All my vocal stuff here that I need to play with is all in green anyway. Any kind of clip that I'm using for like drums or samples, all of it's red, so it's obviously going to be in this column. Or if it involves keys, then it's probably going to be some kind of bluish purple, so that's over here. So I know immediately like where some of these things are. And I think it really just comes from almost repeatedly doing things again and again and again. This is like the 10,000 hours part, I think, Kendall. It's like it's like you do something that many times and you end up having the same system. So for example, now if I let's try this out. If I pull up a different live set, I think it also has the same color coding system. Let me see if I can pull it up. Yeah, this one is from a different one. It might be slightly different because this one is one that I did in the reverse. No, it's not. It's the same. All my drums are
bass is blue.
Bass is blue. The keys are like purple. Audio, this probably had vocals coming in, so that's why it's green. And then these are like the other kind of synth stuff that's going on. And then drums again are an orange color, and it all looks kind of like the same. So in that sense, like I guess it's a template of sorts, if you will.
Right. Right.
And then try to fill out all of the empty bits and like play all of these. So this is, for example, one idea that I started off specifically in session view, and that I haven't fully developed it yet, but I probably will end up working on it and bringing it over into the arrangement view. So if I check this out now, there's nothing much in arrangement view. I think I tried to record something but didn't actually end up doing it. So everything is still stuck over here in session view, but that's good. And I have more space to, play with different types of things as well. So
yeah, and I think that's a message which, I mean, I just am so impressed with the possibilities of Push, right? I mean, it's like you said, it's a drum kit, it's sequencers, it's melodic sequencers, it can record it. I mean, it's just so powerful. And that's what, like, we try to underscore this idea that session view is this playground for you. It's this composing pad to create ideas, and you can see it's understood really in the bigger world, right? Because Logic said, and they've kind of tried to,
and they literally called it live.
All about that.
They called it live view.
Live loops. I don't know if y'all saw this too, but their new sampler, it kind of mirrors Simpler, and it's called Quick Sampler.
Oh,
So I I was
There are
just
only so
laughing
many good
hard.
ideas. What are you gonna do?
I
Yeah.
know. It's like you can't call it simpler, even though it's a simple sampler. So we'll call it quick because it's quick.
Oh my God.
But the cool part about that one, though, that I will say is a slight funner thing about Logic is you can record directly into it.
Mm,
You can do like there's a button that you can click and you can be like, here's the sample and record.
that's really cool.
Yeah, that one's pretty cool. So maybe that's the only edge that they have. I'm kidding. I still love Logic now and then, but yeah. So I think it's kind of like the different approaches. It's like sometimes I'll start from session view to make stuff like in this case, and then something will eventually come out. But also just the idea. Also, if it's even if it's not like specifically named, if it's named in like the scenes, that's important too. Like prepare yourself for success. So all of these things going
Now,
on.
where do you live in the plugin spectrum? Because do you just freeze everything that you use a plugin on? Because I know you are like, if you were getting nervous with 24% CPU usage.
Oh, totally. Yeah. To be honest, I mainly use native stuff, like native things to live. Like for most live performances, honestly, I think I don't ever use third-party stuff. Like I never use Serum for live performances, for example, although I love it for production. But it's good for production because you can use it, and then if it's taking up a lot of CPU, you just freeze and flatten it, and then it's like gone. Bye-bye. Don't have to think about it anymore.
You're talking about something really important though that I think speaks to Ableton is like they have such top-notch stuff that you don't have to go at third party. Nothing wrong with third party. But
totally.
like you can have the live experience and not go, oh my gosh, it's like 75% CPU. Like so like just so
and in 11 they've like pulled in some stuff from Spitfire, and I mean they just have amazing they've got
Really
amazing
good stuff.
sounds.
I think like it's and with 11 there's like a couple of I know we only have a couple more minutes left, but maybe I'll just show this super quick thing. It's like it's very cool. There's a couple of new devices in Live 11 that I'm personally a big fan of, and it's this thing they have a couple of spectral devices, a spectral resonator and spectral time, that are like really awesome for working with these things. So maybe let's even try this on the drums. Let's see if we can do a little bit of this over here. Let's bring down the volume just so that we don't kill everybody's ears. But let's say I'm working with some kind of drum loop, right? And I'll just keep it going in the background, but it sounds pretty clean at the moment. Like, yeah. Cool. And I can pull spectral resonator onto it, and let's see how the drums sound now. And of course we can mix it, so it's like here's like some melodic drums. The cool part also is I can make my melodic drums chordal drums. So like if I know that my, let's say, let's actually go ahead and solo these. If I know that my keys have some nice chord progressions in them, which they do, I can play that. And I can head back over to this other spectral device, and we can take the MIDI from the keys.
Oh, poof.
that's wild.
Yeah, chord progression.
It's like a vocoder for the
It is.
Yeah.
It literally is.
That's cool.
This one's really fun, changing the modes. So you get like some granular types.
Yeah.
Switch it back to chorus. But yeah, it's just like lots of really cool devices. You don't need a third-party plugin for that. You can use a native live
Oh,
device.
that's so cool. Yeah.
Totally.
That's MPE enabled on top of it. Look at the MPE
It
button.
is,
Wow.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
And it's funny, we were just talking about this before too, but like so many of the cool MPE stuff that happens over here. Like I think this was a clip that I recorded as well, but you can see the pressure.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's crazy.
It's amazing. And you no longer need 16 tracks for the 16
no
channels.
mapping.
So like some filter wavetable position stuff, I think. And I mean, one of the funnest things about this too is this is maybe the last thing that I'll end on, but you know how like a lot of folks complain about when you have a pitch bend that ends at the end of a clip or end of a note, it'll always get stuck and then you have to kind of like reset it. But MPE takes that away. So
Yeah.
you don't like have to do that anymore. So even if you're like within the same clip and like, let's say, let's do it like with this note. So if we're trying to be funny with this note, how many semitones should we bend it by?
You pick 3, 5,
Yeah.
12, 12 and a half.
Okay, 12. So let's actually do 12 and a half. Let's do it. So let's do 12 point.
Oh my gosh. That's great.
12 point. Well, at 12.5. Actually, can I? Yes, I can type it in. 12.5. So.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it just resets, which is awesome.
That's great, right?
So now we have that going. But yeah, there's like so many cool stuff that you can do in live. And yeah, previously you could only do this in Bitwig, like you mentioned, Kendall. So now we have less of an excuse to run away to Bitwig. Sorry, Bitwig. But
Well, and you know what it does for me is like Stencil Morph is one of my favorite instruments.
Oh,
Right. And so this just makes Stencil like
so
a ridiculous platform. And I think that like to kind of come full circle and close up what we've been talking about is this idea is that these look like, I mean, this looks very German to me. This is like numbers and
Yeah.
here are the algorithms and here are the parameters for the functions. But these are instruments. And they're instruments that you learn to play and that you can express yourself with and have incredible power with a low threshold of entry. So you're doing amazing things with that spectral harmonizer. And we didn't sit here and read the manual together, and we didn't learn spectral theory, and we didn't learn the Fourier transform. We just made it happen.
yeah.
yeah, totally. Although that is what's happening though for anyone who is interested in like FFTs and whatever, it's doing the thing. So it's
That's right. That's right. And that's
But,
the
yeah.
attraction to the other half of the crowd, the other half of the room.
totally. It's like it's so good. And honestly, like I think I'm just really excited by a lot of the stuff that I think Ableton as a company is doing. They know we're big fans of them already, so at this point they won't be surprised. But yeah, it's just like a lot of the stuff that they're thinking of, I think really speaks to just educators in general. Maybe that's why I keep personally gravitating back towards them so much, because
Yeah.
they're so supportive and
Mhm.
they just understand that there's like lots of really great things that can come out of making music accessible, and you don't have to have a ton of money to rent out a studio and hire out like engineers or whatever. You can poke around yourself if you're willing to take that leap of faith and make some really cool stuff.
Claire, thank you so much for taking time. I know you have Zoomed probably 15 hours already this Friday. And so we just are so grateful for you making time for Montco and to come on the air with us. We're so impressed with the work you're doing, and we're so
you.
excited to have you as a friend of the program here. So we really look forward to seeing you perform a lot in the upcoming year. And hopefully we'll be sending students to Berklee, and you'll be working with our students. And we'll have
I'm going to Berklee, so yes.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, thank you so much for having me, Kendall and Jen. Really appreciate it. It's so nice to see y'all again as well. It's been so long.
It's so exciting.
It has been a long time. Well, there'll be another summer that we're all outside under an umbrella making music.
Yeah,
Right now we're stuck
totally.
in these little frames, but it's better
my
than
God.
nothing.
Or in Berlin for Loop.
That is a dream come
Please.
true. We're hanging on to the dream.
That would be awesome. Please.
I literally was like a couple weeks away. I had the ticket and
Oh.
we
Yeah,
were so
I know.
close. We were so close.
Oh,
But
yeah.
there'll be another day.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
thank you so much for what you shared with
Thank
us. We
you.
really appreciate it. We know it's going to be incredibly important to our students because they need that idea. I mean, everyone who's willing to be vulnerable and open and show their ideas, show their creativity, talk about how they got to where they are. It means so much to the people in our crowd. And we're just very grateful to you for being willing to share like that tonight.
No, totally. Thank you for having me. It's been really wonderful sharing. So appreciate
Well,
it.
outstanding. Thank you. So we'll be posting this in a couple of days, and we'll flip you a link for sure. But Jen, do you want to say anything as a closeout on our series, because this is the last of our
Your
semester?
last person, yeah. It's been a
cool.
really cool journey coming from like a global perspective to a local perspective, and all the different types of ideas from a musical standpoint to like a philosophical to computer science. And thank you, Claire, for just bringing that all together as our last session. And it's been a really cool journey. So thank you for joining us on that journey.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So be sure we're running classes in the spring. We're running classes in the summer. Well, you can see Claire at 343 Labs. You can see, do you have we'll make sure we'll get all your social media and all your contact sites up to overlay on the video.
Totally.
And
Sounds
we'll
cool.
make sure everybody has a lot of ways to reach out and see what you're producing next.
Cool. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Claire. Everybody have a great
Thanks
evening.
so much. Have a great night. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.